Hey guys, tonight we will know the truth about Zeus in Greek mythology. The ancient Greeks lived a very long time ago. They lived thousands of years before the present day. Thousands of years is a long time. It is many human lifetimes. If we calculate using an average human lifespan of 70 years, thousands of years would be many dozens of lifetimes stacked end to end. This is a considerable length of time when measured in human terms. The ancient Greeks lived in the region we now call Greece. Greece is a country located in southeastern Europe. It is on the Balkan Peninsula. A peninsula is a piece of land that is surrounded by water on three sides. The word peninsula comes from Latin words meaning almost an island. Greece is surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Ionian Sea. The geography of Greece is mountainous. Mountains are elevated landforms that rise high above the surrounding terrain. They are formed through tectonic forces or volcanism. The mountains of Greece made travel and communication between different regions difficult. This geographical fragmentation contributed to the development of independent city-states rather than a unified nation. A city-state is an independent political entity consisting of a city and its surrounding territory. The ancient Greek word for city-state was polis. The plural is polis. Famous Greek city-states included Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. Each city-state had its own government, laws, and customs. They sometimes cooperated, but often competed or fought with each other. The ancient Greeks did not have modern science. Science as we understand it today, based on systematic observation, experimentation, and the formulation of testable hypotheses, did not exist in ancient times. The scientific method was not developed until much later, primarily during the Renaissance and scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries. Without science to explain natural phenomena, the ancient Greeks created stories. These stories are called myths. A myth is a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people, or explaining natural or social phenomena. Myths typically involve supernatural beings or events. The word mythology refers to the collection of myths belonging to a culture. The ancient Greeks created many myths. These myths featured gods and goddesses, heroes and monsters, and explanations for how the world came to be and how various things worked. These were not true stories, they were invented stories. They were fiction. Fiction means something that is invented or imagined rather than being factually true. One of the central figures in Greek mythology was Zeus. Zeus was described as the king of the gods. He was said to rule over the sky and thunder. He was depicted as a powerful male figure, often with a beard holding a lightning bolt. This was all made up. Zeus did not actually exist. He was a fictional character invented by ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks made up the story of Zeus to explain things they did not understand. They observed lightning during storms. Lightning is a natural electrical discharge. It occurs when electrical charges build up in clouds and then discharge to the ground or to other clouds. The ancient Greeks did not understand electricity or meteorology. They did not know the scientific explanation for lightning, so they created a story. They said that lightning was caused by a powerful god named Zeus who threw lightning bolts. This explanation made sense within their framework of understanding. It provided a comprehensible answer to a confusing phenomenon. Of course, it was not the correct answer, but it was an answer that satisfied their need to understand the world. Similarly, thunder was attributed to Zeus. Thunder is the sound caused by lightning. When lightning heats the air rapidly, it creates a shock wave that we hear as thunder. The ancient Greeks did not know this. They thought thunder was the sound of Zeus's anger or the sound of his chariot rumbling across the sky. This was incorrect, but it was their explanation. Let us consider how these myths were created and transmitted in tedious detail that will surely induce sleep. The ancient Greeks had an oral tradition. An oral tradition is a way of transmitting cultural knowledge, stories, and history through spoken word rather than written text. Before widespread literacy, oral tradition was the primary method of preserving and sharing information. Stories about Zeus and other gods would be told by parents to children, by elders to younger people, by professional storytellers called bards. A bard was a poet and storyteller who would recite epic poems and myths from memory. The most famous Greek bards whose names have survived were Homer, who supposedly composed the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Hesiod, who composed the Theogony and Works and Days. The Theogony is a poem about the origins of the gods. Theogony means birth of the gods. It describes how the universe and the odds came into being according to Greek mythology. It is entirely fictional. Every event described in the Theogony was made up. None of it actually happened. It was imaginative storytelling by ancient Greeks attempting to explain existence. According to the Theogony, in the beginning there was chaos. Chaos was described as a void or gap. From chaos came Gaia, the earth. Gaia then gave birth to Uranus, the sky. Gaia and Uranus had children called the Titans. The Titans were powerful divine beings. This is all made-up mythology. One of the Titans was Cronus. Cronus overthrew his father Uranus and became ruler. Cronus married his sister Rhea. In Greek mythology, gods marrying their siblings was common. This reflected the fact that gods were fictional characters not bound by human social norms. Cronus and Rhea had children, including Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. According to the myth, Cronus was told that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. To prevent this, Cronus swallowed each child at birth. Rhea was upset about this. When Zeus was born, Rhea tricked Cronus by giving him a stone wrapped in cloth to swallow instead of the baby. Zeus was hidden and grew up in secret. When Zeus became an adult, he returned and forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings. Then Zeus and his siblings waged war against Cronus and the other Titans. This war was called the Titanomachy. It supposedly lasted 10 years. Zeus and his siblings won. They imprisoned the Titans in Tartarus, which was described as a deep abyss below the underworld. After defeating the Titans, Zeus and his brothers divided the cosmos. Zeus became ruler of the sky, Poseidon became ruler of the sea, and Hades became ruler of the underworld. The earth was neutral territory. Zeus became the king of all gods and ruled from Mount Olympus, which was said to be the home of the gods. Mount Olympus is a real mountain. It is the highest mountain in Greece, with an elevation of 2,917 meters. However, the ancient Greeks' belief that gods lived on top of Mount Olympus was fictional. There are no gods living on Mount Olympus. If you climb to the summit today, you will find rock and sometimes snow, but no gods or divine palaces. The ancient Greeks imagined that the gods lived in magnificent palaces on Olympus and spent their time feasting, arguing, and interfering in human affairs. This was all made up. These stories were entertainment and explanation, not factual history. The gods were characters in stories, similar to characters in modern novels or movies, except that the ancient Greeks believed these stories were true. Belief is the acceptance that something is true or exists. The ancient Greeks believed in their gods. They believed Zeus was real. They were wrong, but they sincerely believed it. They had no way to know better. They had no scientific instruments to investigate the true causes of lightning and thunder. They had no telescopes to see that Olympus was just a mountain. They had no framework for understanding that myths were fiction. This belief in myths was not stupidity. The ancient Greeks were intelligent people. They created philosophy, mathematics, theatre, and many other important cultural achievements. But they lived in a time before science had developed methods for distinguishing truth from fiction in matters of natural phenomena. Their myths were the best explanations they had. Let us examine in excruciating detail how the myth of Zeus functioned in Greek society. Zeus was worshipped through religious practices. Worship means showing reverence and adoration for a deity. The ancient Greeks built temples to Zeus. A temple is a building dedicated to religious worship. Many temples to Zeus were constructed throughout the Greek world. The most famous temple to Zeus was at Olympia. Olympia was a sanctuary site where the Olympic Games were held. The Games were athletic competitions held every 4 years. They were dedicated to Zeus. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia contained a massive statue of Zeus, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This statue was made by the sculptor Phidias around 430 BCE. It was approximately 13 meters tall. It depicted Zeus seated on a throne. The statue was made of ivory and gold over a wooden frame. This technique was called chryselephantine. The statue no longer exists. It was destroyed or lost in late antiquity. We know about it only from ancient descriptions. The ancient Greeks would sacrifice to Zeus. A sacrifice is an offering to a deity. Animal sacrifice was common in ancient Greek religion. Animals like oxen, sheep, or goats would be killed in ritual ceremonies. The meat would be burned on altars, with the smoke rising to the sky where the gods supposedly dwelled. Some of the meat might be consumed by worshippers in a ritual feast. These sacrifices were performed to honor Zeus, to seek his favor, to thank him for blessings, or to appease his anger. The ancient Greeks believed that Zeus and other gods could help or harm humans, depending on whether the gods were pleased or displeased. This belief system encouraged people to perform sacrifices and follow religious rituals. Of course, these sacrifices had no effect on Zeus because Zeus did not exist. The smoke from burning meat simply dispersed into the atmosphere. No god received or consumed it. The entire practice was based on a false belief in fictional beings. However, the practice had social functions. It brought communities together, reinforced shared beliefs and values, and provided structure and meaning to life. Prayers were also directed to Zeus. A prayer is a solemn request for help or expression of thanks addressed to a god. People would pray to Zeus for various reasons: for success in war, for good weather, for justice, for protection, for prosperity. They would speak or think their requests, believing Zeus could hear them and might grant them. Zeus could not hear these prayers because Zeus did not exist. Prayers to Zeus were ultimately just thoughts or words spoken into empty air. However, Prayer served psychological functions for the people praying. It provided comfort, hope, and a sense of control in uncertain situations. It allowed people to articulate their fears and desires. Festivals were held in honor of Zeus. A festival is a day or period of celebration, typically for religious reasons. Different cities had different festivals for Zeus at different times of the year. These festivals would include sacrifices, processions, athletic competitions, dramatic performances, and feasting. The Olympic Games mentioned earlier were the most famous festival associated with Zeus. They were held every 4 years at Olympia in his honor. Athletes from various Greek city-states would compete in events like running, wrestling, boxing, chariot racing, and pentathlon. Winners received olive wreaths and great honor. The games were so important that truces would be declared between warring city-states to allow safe travel to Olympia. These athletic competitions had no actual connection to any real deity. They were simply a tradition that the Greeks believed honored Zeus. The competitions were real, the athletic achievements were real, but the connection to Zeus was fictional. Zeus was not watching the games, was not pleased by them, and did not care about the results. The entire religious framework was imaginary. Let us now examine the characteristics attributed to Zeus in tedious detail. Zeus was described as the most powerful of all gods. Power in this context means the ability to control events and other beings. Zeus was said to be able to do essentially anything he wished. He could control the weather, transform himself and others into different forms, grant immortality, cause destruction, and enforce his will on gods and humans alike. These powers were all fictional. In reality, weather is controlled by atmospheric conditions and natural forces, not by any conscious being. Transformation of one being into another being is not possible. Immortality, meaning living forever, is not possible for biological organisms. The powers attributed to Zeus were fantasies that violated the laws of nature. Zeus was also characterized as having human-like emotions and flaws. He was described as becoming angry, jealous, lustful, and vengeful. He was said to have many love affairs with both goddesses and mortal women. These affairs resulted in numerous children, both divine and semi-divine. This characterization of Zeus as flawed and emotional made him more relatable to humans, but also revealed that he was a human creation. If Zeus were a real, all-powerful deity, it seems unlikely he would have petty human emotions like jealousy or uncontrolled lust. These characteristics were projected onto Zeus by the humans who invented him. They imagined their god as being like themselves, only more powerful. This is typical of mythological gods across many cultures. Gods tend to resemble the people who create them, reflecting those people's values, concerns, and psychological characteristics. The myths describe Zeus as having affairs with many women. These stories were created by Greek storytellers and served various narrative and cultural functions. Some myths explained the origins of heroes or noble families by claiming descent from Zeus. Some myths provided entertaining or titillating stories. Some myths conveyed moral lessons, though often contradictory ones. One famous myth involves Zeus and Europa. Europa was a Phoenician princess. According to the myth, Zeus saw her and desired her. He transformed himself into a beautiful white bull. Europa was attracted to the gentle bull and climbed on its back. Zeus then carried her across the sea to the island of Crete, where he revealed his true identity and had relations with her. She bore him sons, including Minos, who became king of Crete. This story is entirely fictional. Zeus did not exist, so he could not transform into a bull or abduct anyone. The story was invented for various possible reasons: to explain supposed connections between different regions, to entertain, to justify certain political claims. The abduction and assault described in the myth would be criminal acts in modern legal frameworks, but the myth presented them as acceptable because Zeus was a god. Many Zeus myths involve him assaulting women, often through deception. He would transform into various forms to approach women: a bull, a swan, a shower of gold, and others. These transformations allowed him to seduce or force himself on mortal women and nymphs. These stories reflect ancient Greek patriarchal values, where male desire was prioritized over female autonomy. These myths were not moral guides in the modern sense. They were stories that reflected the culture that created them. The ancient Greeks did not necessarily see these myths as encouraging assault. They might have interpreted them allegorically, or simply as entertaining stories about powerful beings who operated by different rules than humans. Nonetheless, the myths reveal cultural attitudes toward gender and power. Another famous myth involves Zeus and Leda. Leda was a queen of Sparta. Zeus transformed into a swan and approached her. The result of their union was eggs from which hatched Helen of Troy and the Dioscuri. Helen's abduction by Paris would supposedly lead to the Trojan War, a central event in Greek mythology. Again, this entire story was fiction invented by Greek poets. The Trojan War itself was probably based on some historical conflict between Mycenaean Greeks and the city of Troy, but the mythological elements involving gods were added by storytellers. The Iliad, attributed to Homer, tells the story of the Trojan War with heavy involvement of gods. Zeus and other gods are depicted as taking sides in the conflict, directly intervening in battles and manipulating events. In the Iliad, Zeus is portrayed as trying to remain neutral, but often failing due to pressure from his wife Hera and other gods. This portrayal of Zeus as powerful but not fully in control of events, as subject to nagging from his wife, as having to negotiate and compromise. These characteristics made Zeus more human and relatable, but also made clear that he was a fictional character in a story. Hera was Zeus's wife and sister. In the myths, she was described as the goddess of marriage and family. She was often portrayed as jealous of Zeus's affairs and vengeful toward his lovers and illegitimate children. The relationship between Zeus and Hera was characterized by conflict and mutual retaliation. Zeus would have affairs. Hera would punish the women involved. Zeus would become angry at Hera's interference, and the cycle would continue. This dysfunctional relationship was entirely made up. Neither Zeus nor Hera existed. But the stories about their relationship reflected Greek observations of human marital conflicts, and perhaps served as entertaining narratives about the domestic troubles even gods supposedly faced. The myths made divine beings seem closer to human experience. Let us consider how the physical world was explained through Zeus myths in more soporific detail. The ancient Greeks saw lightning and thunder during storms. These are natural meteorological phenomena. Lightning is an electrical discharge. It occurs when positive and negative charges in clouds or between clouds and ground become separated and then reconnect. The discharge can heat the air to around 30,000 kelvins, which is about 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. This heating causes the air to expand rapidly, creating a shock wave. This shock wave is what we hear as thunder. The sound can be very loud because of the intensity of the energy release. All of this is explainable through physics. No supernatural intervention is involved. No god is throwing lightning bolts. But the ancient Greeks did not know physics. They observed lightning and thunder and sought an explanation. They created the myth that Zeus threw lightning bolts from the sky. In artistic representations, Zeus is often shown holding a lightning bolt as his symbol and weapon. This lightning bolt was depicted as a zigzag object that he could hurl at his enemies or at anyone who displeased him. In myths, Zeus would use lightning to punish or destroy. He supposedly used lightning to kill various figures who offended him. He used lightning and thunder to signal his displeasure or to enforce his will. These stories provided a framework for understanding why lightning struck in certain places. If a building was hit by lightning, it might be interpreted as a sign of Zeus's anger. Of course, lightning strikes are determined by physics, not by the anger of gods. Lightning tends to strike tall objects and good electrical conductors. A building might be struck because it was the tallest structure in an area, or because it contained metal, or simply by chance. There is no intentionality behind lightning strikes. They are natural events. The same is true of other weather phenomena. Rain, for example, occurs when water vapour in the atmosphere condenses into droplets heavy enough to fall to the ground. This happens through physical processes involving temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. Zeus had nothing to do with rain because Zeus did not exist, but the ancient Greeks attributed rain to Zeus. They called him Zeus Haetios, Zeus the rain bringer. They would pray to Zeus for rain during droughts. When rain came, they would thank Zeus. When rain did not come, they might offer more sacrifices, trying to appease Zeus. These practices were based on the false belief that a god controlled weather. Droughts are caused by meteorological patterns, not by divine displeasure. A drought occurs when an area receives less precipitation than normal for an extended period. This can happen due to high pressure systems, changes in ocean temperatures, atmospheric circulation patterns, and other factors. These factors are complex but are natural and physical. No god is withholding rain as punishment. Similarly, floods were attributed to gods. A flood is an overflow of water that submerges normally dry land. Floods can be caused by heavy rainfall, rapid snowmelt, dam failures, storm surges, or other factors. The ancient Greeks might interpret a flood as Zeus's anger, or as the result of actions by Poseidon, the god of the sea. Both interpretations would be wrong because both gods were fictional. Let us examine how Zeus myths explained social and political structures in exhaustive detail. Zeus was called the king of gods. A king is a male sovereign ruler. By making Zeus a king, the myths provided divine justification for human kingship. If the greatest god was a king, then kingship was the natural order. This supported monarchical political systems. Zeus was also associated with justice and law. He was sometimes called Zeus Xenios, Zeus the protector of guests and hospitality. He supposedly enforced the rules of Xenia, which was the Greek custom of hospitality between host and guest. Violating hospitality was considered a grave offence, punishable by Zeus. These ideas about Zeus enforcing social norms served a social function. They encouraged people to follow cultural rules about hospitality by threatening divine punishment for violations. If you believed Zeus would punish you for mistreating a guest, you would be more likely to treat guests well. This helped maintain social order. But Zeus was not actually enforcing anything because Zeus was fictional. Social norms were enforced by human mechanisms: reputation, shame, reciprocal relationships, and sometimes legal systems. The belief in Zeus's enforcement added a supernatural layer of encouragement to follow norms, but the actual enforcement was human. Zeus was said to punish hubris. Hubris is excessive pride or self-confidence, especially when directed against the gods. In Greek myths, characters who exhibited hubris would be punished by gods, often by Zeus. This moral framework encouraged humility and discouraged arrogance. It served social functions by promoting certain values. But the punishments for hubris in myths were fictional. The myths were cautionary tales, not historical accounts. They were teaching tools using made-up stories to illustrate values that the society wanted to promote. This is similar to how modern fables or moral tales use fictional stories to teach lessons. For example, the myth of Prometheus is instructive. Prometheus was a titan who, according to myth, stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. Zeus was angered by this and punished Prometheus by having him chained to a rock, where an eagle would eat his liver daily. The liver would regenerate, and the torture would repeat. Eternally, this was supposedly Prometheus's punishment for defying Zeus. This story is fiction. There was no titan named Prometheus. No one was chained to a rock with an eagle eating their liver. The story was invented to explore themes of rebellion against authority, punishment for defying the powerful, and the price of progress and knowledge. Different interpretations are possible, which is why the myth has remained interesting. Fire in reality was not stolen from gods. Fire is a chemical reaction involving rapid oxidation. Humans learned to control fire through observation and experimentation over long periods of time. Different human groups discovered fire independently. There was no single moment when fire was given to humans, and certainly no supernatural being was involved. But the ancient Greeks needed to explain how humans obtained fire. The Prometheus myth provided that explanation within their cultural framework. It also explored the relationship between humans and gods, the consequences of defying authority, and the value of knowledge and technology. These were meaningful themes even though the specific story was fictional. Let us consider how these myths were transmitted and evolved over time in more tedious detail, designed to induce sleep. As mentioned, myths were originally transmitted orally. Oral transmission means passing information by speaking and listening rather than through written texts. In oral cultures, storytellers would memorize long narratives and recite them from memory. This memorization was aided by various techniques. Repetitive formulas, meter, and rhythm made long narratives easier to remember. Epic poems like the Iliad and Odyssey were composed in dactylic hexameter, a rhythmic pattern that facilitated memorization and recitation. Stock phrases and formulaic descriptions appeared repeatedly, which also aided memory. However, oral transmission allows for variation. Each time a storyteller recites a narrative, they might make small changes, adding details, omitting others, adjusting based on audience reaction or personal preference. Over time, these variations accumulate. Different versions of myths would develop in different regions or among different storytellers. Eventually, some myths were written down. Writing is the representation of language through a system of graphic marks on a durable surface. Writing allows for exact preservation of texts and enables transmission across time and space more reliably than oral tradition. The ancient Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet and adapted it to write Greek around the 8th century BCE. Once myths were written down, they became more fixed. The written version could be copied and would remain relatively stable. However, even written texts could vary. Ancient manuscripts were copied by hand, and copyists would sometimes make errors or deliberate changes. Different written versions of myths could coexist. The myths we know today come from ancient texts that survived through copying and recopying over centuries. Many ancient texts were lost. We have only a fraction of ancient Greek literature. What survived is what happened to be copied enough times to make it through centuries of potential loss through decay, fire, war, and neglect. The myths in surviving texts were already selected and shaped by ancient authors. Homer, Hesiod, and later writers like the Athenian playwrights Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides told myths in particular ways for particular purposes. Their versions became canonical, meaning they became the accepted standard versions. But these canonical versions were not necessarily the original versions, if there even were original versions. Myths evolved over time. Different city-states might have different versions of the same myth. Thebes might tell a story about Zeus differently than Athens. Both versions were made up, but they were made up in different ways by different people. The plasticity of myths reveals their nature as human creations. If Zeus' myths were reporting facts about a real god, there would be one correct version. The existence of multiple contradictory versions shows that the myths were fictional stories that different people told in different ways. No one could check the facts because there were no facts to check. Let us examine specific contradictions in Zeus myths in even more mind-numbing detail. Different myths give different accounts of Zeus's birth and childhood. Hesiod's Theogony says Zeus was born in Crete and hidden in a cave. Other versions say he was born in Arcadia. These locations are different places in Greece. Both cannot be true if Zeus were a real being who was born in one specific location. But Zeus was not a real being. He was a fictional character. Different storytellers placed his birth in different locations for various reasons. Perhaps a Cretan storyteller wanted to claim Zeus was born in Crete to give Crete special importance. Perhaps an Arcadian storyteller made the same claim for Arcadia. Both were making up details about a made-up character. Similarly, myths disagree about details of Zeus's affairs and children. The exact number and identity of Zeus's children varied between different sources. Some sources would include certain children, while other sources would omit them or include different ones. This inconsistency reveals the fictional nature of these accounts. If Zeus were real and really had children, there would be a factual answer to how many children he had and who they were. The existence of inconsistent accounts shows that storytellers were inventing children for Zeus to serve narrative purposes. A storyteller might invent a child of Zeus to explain the origin of a hero, or to connect their city to the king of gods. For example, many heroes were said to be sons of Zeus. Heracles, Perseus, Minos, and others were called sons of Zeus by mortal women. These claims of divine parentage elevated these heroes and gave them special status. But these claims were fictional. These heroes, if they existed at all, were children of human parents. The claim of Zeus's parentage was an embellishment added to stories. Heracles is an interesting case. Heracles, called Hercules in Latin, was said to be the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. According to myth, Zeus disguised himself as Alcmene's husband Amphitryon and slept with her. This resulted in the birth of Heracles. Hera, jealous as usual, persecuted Heracles throughout his life. The 12 labours of Heracles are famous myths. Heracles was said to have performed 12 seemingly impossible tasks: killing the Nemean lion, killing the Hydra, capturing the Olden Hind, and so on. These stories are adventures featuring a heroic, strong man overcoming challenges. They are entertaining fiction, not historical accounts. There is debate among scholars about whether Heracles was based on a real person. Perhaps there was a historical strongman or warrior whose exploits were exaggerated and mythologized over time. Or perhaps Heracles was entirely fictional from the start. Either way, the supernatural elements, the divine parentage, the involvement of gods, the monsters, were fictional additions. The monsters Heracles supposedly fought were made up. The Nemean lion was said to be a lion with hide so tough that no weapon could pierce it. This is not possible. No biological creature could have skin impervious to all weapons. The Nemean lion was a fictional monster, invented to provide a dramatic challenge for the hero. The Hydra was described as a serpent with multiple heads that would grow back when cut off. This violates biology. Animals do not regrow heads. The Hydra was another fictional monster. These monsters made the myths more exciting and dramatic, but they were products of imagination, not descriptions of real creatures. The same is true of all monsters in Greek mythology. The Minotaur, Medusa, the Chimera, Cerberus, and countless others, all were fictional. They were created by storytellers to populate their narratives with wondrous and terrifying beings. They served symbolic and narrative functions, but had no existence in reality. Let us consider the function of these myths in even more exhaustive and sleep-inducing detail. Myths served multiple functions in Greek society. They provided entertainment. In a world without books, television, movies, or internet, oral storytelling was a primary form of entertainment. People enjoyed hearing exciting stories about gods, heroes, and monsters. Professional storytellers would recite long epic poems at gatherings. People would listen for hours to tales of the Trojan War or the adventures of Odysseus trying to return home. These stories were engaging and memorable. They featured drama, conflict, romance, and action. They were the entertainment media of their time. Myths also provided explanations. As discussed extensively already, myths explained natural phenomena like lightning, thunder, rain, and earthquakes. They explained the origins of places, peoples, and customs. They answered questions about why things are the way they are. These explanations were wrong, but they satisfied the human need to understand. Humans have a deep desire to understand causation. When we observe an effect, we want to know the cause. Why does lightning strike? Why do earthquakes happen? Why do we have to die? In the absence of scientific knowledge, myths provided answers to these questions. The answers were fictional, but they were psychologically satisfying. Myths also provided moral and social guidance. Stories about heroes demonstrated virtues like courage, cleverness, and perseverance. Stories about punishments for hubris encouraged humility. Stories about the importance of hospitality reinforced social norms. Myths were teaching tools that transmitted cultural values. These teaching functions did not require the myths to be true. Fables like those attributed to Aesop use obviously fictional stories about talking animals to teach moral lessons. Everyone knows the animals did not really talk, but the lessons can still be valid. Greek myths functioned similarly, though the Greeks believed their myths were true. Myths also provided social cohesion. Shared stories created shared identity. All Greeks knew the myths about Zeus, Athena, Apollo, and other gods. These shared references created a sense of common culture, despite the political fragmentation of Greece into competing city-states. Myths were part of what made Greeks feel Greek. Religious practices based on myths brought communities together. Festivals, sacrifices, and other rituals were communal activities. They required cooperation and provided opportunities for social interaction. Even though the gods being worshipped were fictional, the social benefits of communal religious practice were real. This pattern, fictional beliefs generating real social benefits, is common in human cultures. Many religions involve beliefs that are not empirically verifiable, yet these religions provide community, meaning, moral framework, and psychological comfort to billions of people. The truth or falsity of the beliefs is separate from the social and psychological functions they serve. However, it is still important to recognize truth. Zeus was not real. Greek myths were fiction. This is not an attack on ancient Greeks or on religion generally. It is simply a statement of fact. Zeus did not exist. Lightning is not thrown by a god. These are factual claims that can be verified through evidence and logic. The evidence against Zeus's existence is overwhelming. No one has ever observed Zeus. No scientific instrument has detected Zeus. No reliable testimony confirms Zeus's existence. The phenomena attributed to Zeus, lightning, thunder, rain, are fully explained by natural causes. There is no need for the Zeus hypothesis to explain anything. The burden of proof lies with those claiming something exists. If someone claims Zeus exists, they must provide evidence. The default position is not to believe in things without evidence. Since no credible evidence for Zeus has ever been presented, and since natural explanations suffice for all phenomena attributed to Zeus, the rational conclusion is that Zeus does not exist. This conclusion does not require proving that Zeus does not exist. Proving a negative is generally impossible. We cannot search the entire universe to confirm Zeus is nowhere. But we can note the complete absence of evidence for Zeus and the sufficiency of natural explanations, and rationally conclude that Zeus is fictional. The same reasoning applies to all Greek gods: Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite, Ares, Hephaestus, Hermes, Dionysus, and all the rest. None of them existed. They were all fictional characters created by ancient Greeks. The stories about them were made up. The temples built for them were built for beings that did not exist. The sacrifices offered to them were wasted on nothing. This may seem obvious to modern readers, but it is worth stating explicitly and at length. Many people today recognize that Greek gods were fictional. This is common knowledge in educated societies. But the process of reasoning that leads to this conclusion is important to understand because it applies to other claims as well. Let us examine how we know Greek myths were made up in even more tedious detail. First, internal inconsistencies in myths suggest fabrication. as mentioned, myths contradict each other about details. These contradictions indicate that different people were making up different versions rather than describing real events that actually happened one way. Second, the myths violate known natural laws. Zeus transforming into a bull or a swan violates biology. Matter and energy cannot transform in these ways. Gods living forever violates what we know about biological organisms. Lightning being thrown by a god violates physics. These violations indicate the myths describe impossible events that did not occur. Third, the myths resemble myths from other cultures in ways that suggest common patterns of human invention. Many cultures have created myths involving powerful sky gods, flood stories, creation narratives, and hero tales. These parallels suggest that humans tend to create similar types of myths when inventing explanations for the world. The similarities point to common patterns of imagination rather than to independent reports of real events. Fourth, the cultural specificity of Greek myths indicates they were human creations reflecting Greek culture. The gods behave like ancient Greeks, eat Greek food, wear Greek clothing, and care about Greek values. If these were real cosmic beings, we would expect them to transcend human cultural specificity. Their very Greekness reveals them as Greek inventions. Fifth, the evolution and variation of myths over time indicates they were malleable stories rather than fixed historical accounts. Real events would have one true version. Myths changed and varied because they were stories that could be adapted and modified by different storytellers for different purposes. Sixth, the absence of empirical evidence for gods is striking. Despite thousands of years of human history, no god has ever been reliably observed, measured, or detected. If Zeus existed and threw lightning, we should be able to detect his intervention in atmospheric electrical phenomena. We detect only natural electrical discharges following physical laws. Seventh, we now have natural explanations for phenomena attributed to gods. We understand lightning, thunder, rain, earthquakes, disease, and countless other things through science. These natural explanations are verified through observation and experiment. They work reliably and allow us to predict and sometimes control phenomena. The god explanations are unnecessary and unsupported. Eighth, the Greek gods do not match what we might expect from actual supreme beings. They are petty, jealous, lustful, and limited in various ways. Zeus can be deceived, constrained, and challenged. These characteristics make sense if Zeus is a fictional character, invented by humans projecting human traits onto imagined beings. They make less sense if Zeus is meant to be an actual cosmic power. For all these reasons and more, we can confidently conclude that Zeus was made up. He was a fictional character invented by ancient Greeks. The myths about him were stories, not history. This conclusion is not controversial among educated people today. It is simply a recognition of facts. However, this recognition took time to develop historically. For many centuries, people in the Western world believed Greek and Roman myths were either true or were corrupted versions of true biblical history. It was not until the development of critical historical methods and scientific understanding that myths were clearly recognized as fictional. Let us examine the historical development of this recognition in more sleep-inducing detail. In late antiquity, as Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, Christian writers argued that pagan gods were false. They said that Zeus and other gods were either demons deceiving humans or were simply non-existent fictions. This was religiously motivated criticism, not scholarly analysis, but it began questioning the reality of these gods. After Christianity became dominant in Europe, Greek and Roman myths were preserved primarily as literature and as objects of study for understanding classical culture. Medieval and Renaissance scholars studied classical texts, but did not believe in the old gods. They saw myths as allegorical or as interesting stories from the past, not as religious truth. During the Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries, scholars began to study myths more systematically. They compared myths from different cultures and looked for patterns. They developed theories about how myths originated and what functions they served. This academic study of mythology as a human phenomenon developed into the field we now call religious studies or mythology studies. Scholars proposed various theories about myth origins. Some suggested myths were corrupted memories of real historical events or people. Others suggested myths were allegories for natural phenomena. Still others suggested myths emerged from primitive attempts to explain the world. All these theories recognized that myths were human creations rather than divine revelations. In the 19th century, the science of archaeology began excavating ancient sites and discovering material evidence of ancient cultures. This physical evidence allowed scholars to contextualize myths within their historical and cultural settings. Myths could be seen as products of specific times and places, reflecting specific social structures and values. Anthropology also developed in the 19th century, studying human cultures comparatively. Anthropologists observed that many cultures had myths, and these myths showed both similarities and differences. This suggested that myth-making was a universal human activity that took different forms in different cultures. Myths were cultural products, not transcendent truths. In the 20th century, psychology offered new frameworks for understanding myths. Carl Jung proposed that myths expressed archetypes from the collective unconscious. Joseph Campbell argued that myths from different cultures followed common patterns that reflected universal human experiences and psychological needs. These theories, whether fully correct or not, treated myths as human psychological productions. Today, scholars study myths as cultural texts that reveal information about the societies that produced them. Myths are analysed for what they tell us about ancient values, social structures, gender relations, political systems, and worldviews. This scholarly approach is completely secular and treats myths as human creations without any divine inspiration or supernatural truth. This historical development shows that recognition of myths as fiction was gradual. It required development of critical historical methods, scientific understanding of natural phenomena, anthropological comparison of cultures, and willingness to question traditional religious claims. But the conclusion is now well established. Zeus was made up. Greek myths are fiction, and yet these fictional stories remain culturally significant. They have inspired art, literature, philosophy, and psychology for thousands of years. They continue to be taught, studied, and referenced. Their fictional status does not diminish their cultural importance. Fiction can be valuable and meaningful, even while not being true. Many of the greatest works of human creativity are fiction. Novels, plays, films, paintings, sculptures. These works explore human experiences, emotions, and ideas through imaginary characters and situations. Greek myths functioned similarly. They were works of imagination that explored themes of power, justice, love, jealousy, pride, and countless other aspects of human experience. The character of Zeus, though fictional, has influenced Western culture profoundly. Zeus represents certain ideas: authority, power, justice, sky, storms. These associations have persisted. Modern English uses "by Jove" as an exclamation, with Jove being another name for Zeus/Jupiter. The planet Jupiter is named for the Roman equivalent of Zeus. Thursday is named for Thor, a Norse god similar to Zeus. These cultural traces do not make Zeus real. They simply show that fictional creations can have lasting cultural impact. Zeus as a character in stories has influenced literature, art, and thought for millennia. But Zeus as an actual being never existed, and does not exist now. In conclusion, after this exhaustingly long and deliberately boring exploration, we can state definitively: Zeus was just a made-up story. The ancient Greeks invented Zeus to explain natural phenomena they did not understand and to provide narrative structure for their culture. All the myths about Zeus, his birth, his rise to power, his affairs, his interventions in human events, were fiction. They were creative storytelling, not historical or factual reporting. This recognition does not diminish the ancient Greeks. They were intelligent, creative people who built a remarkable civilization. They made enormous contributions to philosophy, mathematics, theatre, politics, and many other fields. But they did not have modern science, and they filled that gap with mythology. Their myths were impressive creative works that served important functions, but they were not true. Modern people should appreciate Greek myths as literature and as windows into ancient culture. We should study them to understand how ancient people thought and what they valued. We should recognize the artistic and narrative skill in these stories. But we should not believe the myths are true. Zeus was made up, and that is the boring but important truth. If you have read this far through this tediously repetitive examination of how Zeus was a fictional creation, you are hopefully quite drowsy. The endless repetition of the same points in slightly different words, the exhaustive exploration of obvious facts, the plodding pace, all were designed to induce sleep. Rest well, knowing that Zeus is not real and never was. He was just a story. And now this story about that story is also complete. Good night. But there is much more to explore about how Zeus and Greek mythology were fabricated, and we must examine every tedious detail to achieve maximum drowsiness. Let us continue with even more repetitive analysis. The process by which the ancient Greeks created their pantheon of gods was gradual and unplanned. A pantheon is the collection of all gods worshipped by a particular culture. The Greek pantheon included not just Zeus but many other gods, each with specific domains and characteristics. All of these gods were equally fictional. The major Olympian gods numbered 12 in most traditional accounts. These were Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, and either Hestia or Dionysus depending on the version. Again, the variation in who was included shows the made-up nature of these lists. If these were real beings, there would be one factual list of who existed. Each god had specific attributes and areas of authority. Zeus ruled the sky and weather. Poseidon ruled the sea and earthquakes. Hades ruled the underworld. Athena was goddess of wisdom and warfare. Apollo was god of the sun, music, and prophecy. Artemis was goddess of the hunt and moon, and so on. These divisions of responsibility were invented by the Greeks to organize their mythology. In reality, the sky does not need a ruler. Weather patterns are caused by atmospheric physics. The sea operates according to physical laws, not divine whim. There is no underworld where souls go after death. Wisdom is a human cognitive capacity, not something controlled by a goddess. The sun is a star powered by nuclear fusion, not driven by a god across the sky. All the domains attributed to gods have natural explanations that do not require supernatural beings. The gods were invented to personify and explain these domains before natural explanations were available. Once we understand the physics, chemistry, and biology involved, the god explanations become unnecessary and can be recognized as fictional. Let us examine the creation myths in even more tedious detail. Different cultures have creation myths explaining how the world and humans came to be. These myths are invariably fictional. They contradict each other and contradict scientific evidence about the actual origins of the universe, Earth, and life. According to Hesiod's theogony, in the beginning was chaos. From chaos emerged Gaia, Earth, Tartarus, the underworld, and Eros, love. Gaia gave birth to Uranus, sky. Gaia and Uranus produced the Titans. The Titans produced the Olympian gods. This is all made up. In reality, the universe began approximately 13.8 billion years ago in the Big Bang. The Big Bang was not an explosion in space, but an expansion of space itself. All matter and energy in the universe was initially in an extremely hot, dense state. This state expanded and cooled, eventually allowing matter to form. Stars formed from clouds of hydrogen gas collapsing under gravity. Nuclear fusion in stars created heavier elements. Stars exploded as supernovae, spreading these elements through space. New stars and planetary systems formed from material enriched with heavy elements. Our solar system formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Earth formed from the accretion of matter in the disk surrounding the young sun. Early Earth was very hot and had no atmosphere suitable for life. Over time, Earth cooled, water accumulated, and an atmosphere developed. The first life appeared perhaps 3.8 billion years ago as simple single-celled organisms. These organisms evolved over billions of years into all the diversity of life we see today. This scientific account is supported by vast amounts of evidence from astronomy, geology, paleontology, and biology. It is testable and has been tested repeatedly. It makes predictions that can be verified. It is the best explanation we have for the origin of Earth and life. The Greek creation myth is not supported by evidence. It makes no testable predictions. It contradicts what we observe about the universe. It was invented by people who had no knowledge of cosmology, geology, or biology. It is clearly fiction. The same applies to myths about the origin of humans. Various Greek myths touch on human origins. Prometheus supposedly created humans from clay and gave them fire. This is fiction. Humans were not molded from clay. Humans evolved from earlier primate species over millions of years. Human. Evolution is documented by fossils showing transitional forms between earlier primates and modern humans. It is supported by genetic evidence showing our relationship to other primates. It is supported by comparative anatomy, showing similarities in skeletal structure, organs, and biochemistry. The evidence for human evolution is overwhelming. Prometheus did not create humans because Prometheus did not exist. Humans were not given fire by a Titan. Humans discovered how to control fire through observation and experimentation. Different human populations discovered fire independently at different times. There was no single moment of fire-giving and no divine involvement. Let us examine the myth of Prometheus in more detail, since it illustrates how myths were invented for explanatory purposes. Prometheus was said to be a Titan who had the ability to foresee the future. His name means forethought. This is already symbolic rather than realistic. Names in myths often have obvious meanings that relate to the character's role, which is a characteristic of fiction. Prometheus supposedly sided with Zeus during the war between the Olympians and the Titans. As a reward, he was allowed to survive while other Titans were imprisoned. He then took an interest in humans. According to various versions, he either created humans from clay or simply became their benefactor and advocate. The gods supposedly kept fire for themselves and did not share it with humans. Prometheus pitied humans who were living without fire. He stole fire from the gods and brought it to Earth, giving it to humans. This allowed humans to cook food, warm themselves, and develop technology. Fire was presented as a transformative gift that elevated humans. Zeus was angry about this theft and punished Prometheus severely. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. Each day an eagle would come and eat his liver. Each night his liver would regenerate. This torture was meant to continue forever. Eventually the hero Heracles freed Prometheus, but that is another story. This myth served multiple functions. It explained why humans have fire. It explored themes of defiance against authority, the price of helping humanity, and the relationship between gods and humans. It provided a dramatic narrative featuring theft, punishment, and suffering. It was memorable and meaningful, but it was entirely made up. The punishment of Prometheus is biologically impossible. Livers do not regenerate fully overnight. While livers can regenerate to some extent if damaged, they do not grow back from being eaten daily. Moreover, the whole scenario involves immortal beings, impossible biology, and supernatural events. It is clearly fantasy. The eagle eating the liver daily is a vivid and disturbing image that makes the myth memorable. The regenerating liver ensures the punishment is eternal and therefore appropriately severe for defying Zeus. These narrative elements serve the story but have no basis in reality. They were invented by storytellers creating a compelling narrative. Many Greek myths feature elaborate punishments for those who offended the gods. Tantalus was punished by being made to stand in water that receded when he tried to drink, and beneath fruit that moved away when he reached for it, creating eternal hunger and thirst. Sisyphus was punished by having to roll a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down, repeating forever. These punishments were creative fictional torments invented to illustrate the consequences of offending gods. They were morality tales using extreme examples to discourage certain behaviors. Tantalus had supposedly killed his son and served him as food to the gods, testing whether they could detect the deception. The gods were not fooled, and Tantalus was punished eternally. This myth about Tantalus is disturbing and serves as a warning against testing or deceiving gods. It reflects ancient Greek values about respecting the divine and avoiding hubris. But the actual events described, serving human flesh to gods who are eating physical food, eternal punishment in a special afterlife location, the specific nature of the punishment, are all fictional elements. The afterlife described in Greek mythology was called Hades, or the underworld. It was supposedly ruled by the god Hades, brother of Zeus. According to myths, when people died, their souls travelled to the underworld. They would be ferried across the river Styx by the ferryman Charon. They would be judged and sent to different regions of the underworld based on their lives. Heroes might go to the Elysian Fields, a pleasant afterlife. Ordinary people would go to the Asphodel Meadows, a neutral grey place. Those being punished would go to Tartarus, where they would suffer. These different afterlife destinations reflected Greek ideas about justice and morality, but none of it was real. There is no evidence for any afterlife. When people die, their bodies cease functioning, brain activity stops, consciousness ends, the atoms that made up the person remain but are no longer organized as a living being. These atoms will be recycled into other forms through decomposition. There is no soul that travels to another realm. The concept of a soul, an immaterial essence that survives death, is unsubstantiated by evidence. Consciousness appears to be a product of brain activity. When the brain stops functioning, consciousness ceases. Studies of brain injuries show that damage to specific brain regions affects specific mental functions, suggesting that mind is what brain does. When the brain dies, the mind dies with it. Various cultures have invented different afterlife beliefs. These beliefs are mutually contradictory, which indicates they cannot all be true. Most likely none are true. They are comforting fictions that help humans cope with the fear of death and the loss of loved ones. The Greek version was one among many such fictions. The ferryman Charon is a particularly interesting fictional element. According to myth, Charon would ferry souls across the river Styx, but only if they paid him. For this reason, ancient Greeks would sometimes place coins on the eyes or in the mouths of corpses to pay Charon. This custom reveals belief in the myth. But there is no ferryman. Dead people do not travel anywhere. The custom of placing coins with corpses was based on a false belief. The coins served no function except as a cultural ritual reflecting mythological beliefs. When archaeologists find ancient burials with coins, this tells us about Greek beliefs, not about any reality of the afterlife. Let us examine the myth of the river Styx in more detail. The Styx was supposedly one of 5 rivers in the underworld. The others were Acheron, the river of woe, Cocytus, the river of lamentation, Phlegethon, the river of fire, and Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. These rivers were fictional geographic features of an imaginary realm. The Styx had special significance. The gods supposedly swore their most binding oaths upon the Styx. An oath sworn on the Styx could not be broken even by gods. This made the river a guarantor of divine promises. But this was all part of the mythology, a narrative device to create stakes in stories. In the Iliad, the sea nymph Thetis dipped her infant son Achilles in the river Styx to make him invulnerable. She held him by his heel, so his heel was not touched by the water and remained vulnerable. This vulnerability would eventually lead to Achilles' death when he was shot in the heel with an arrow during the Trojan War. This myth explains the term Achilles' heel, meaning a weak spot in something otherwise strong. The myth provided origin for this metaphorical expression, but the actual events described, a baby being dipped in a magical river, gaining invulnerability except for one spot, later dying from a wound to that specific spot, are fictional. Invulnerability is not possible. Human tissue can be damaged. Skin can be cut or punctured. Magic water cannot change this biological fact. The river Styx did not exist. Achilles, if he existed at all, was a mortal man who could be wounded anywhere on his body. The myth is creative storytelling, not history. The Trojan War itself is an interesting case. Archaeological evidence confirms that there was a city called Troy, and that it was destroyed multiple times, probably including by Greek attackers. So there may be a historical kernel to the Trojan War stories. However, the mythological elements, the gods fighting alongside humans, the invulnerable Achilles, the judgment of Paris involving goddesses, are clearly fictional additions. The judgment of Paris is a myth explaining how the Trojan War started. Paris was a Trojan prince. 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, competed for the title of fairest. They asked Paris to judge between them. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera offered power, Athena offered military prowess, and Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. The most beautiful woman was Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Aphrodite helped Paris abduct Helen and bring her to Troy. This triggered the Trojan War, as Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon assembled a Greek army to retrieve Helen and punish Troy. The war supposedly lasted 10 years and involved many heroes on both sides. This narrative is epic storytelling. It involves romance, divine intervention, heroic combat, and dramatic confrontations. But the supernatural elements are fiction. Goddesses did not compete for beauty and offer bribes. Aphrodite did not help with an abduction. The war, if it happened, had political and economic causes, not mythological ones. The story of the Trojan horse is famous. According to myth, after 10 years of unsuccessful siege, the Greeks built a giant wooden horse and hid soldiers inside it. They pretended to sail away, leaving the horse as an offering. The Trojans brought the horse inside the city walls. At night, the hidden Greek soldiers emerged and opened the city gates, allowing the Greek army to enter and sack Troy. This story might contain some historical truth. Perhaps the Greeks used some kind of trick to enter Troy. Or it might be entirely fictional, a dramatic ending invented for the story. Either way, the supernatural elements are fictional. Athena did not inspire the plan. The gods were not watching and intervening. It was human cunning or human invention, not divine involvement. The subsequent events, the sack of Troy, the deaths of Trojan heroes, the enslavement of Trojan women, the difficult returns of Greek heroes, are told in various texts including Homer's Odyssey and plays by later Greek tragedians. These stories explore themes of war, revenge, homecoming, and the costs of victory. They are powerful narratives, but we must distinguish the stories from history and recognize the fictional elements. Let us turn to another major cycle of myths, the stories of Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of wine, revelry, theatre, and ecstasy. His myths are particularly interesting because they involve altered states of consciousness and challenge ordinary social boundaries. But like all myths, they are fictional. Dionysus was said to be the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Semele. Hera, jealous as always, tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his true form. Zeus reluctantly agreed. His divine radiance was so intense that it incinerated Semele. Zeus rescued the unborn Dionysus from her womb and sewed the fetus into his own thigh. Dionysus was later born from Zeus's thigh. This bizarre birth story is obviously fictional. Men do not have wombs or the capacity to gestate fetuses in their thighs. Divine radiance that incinerates mortals does not exist. The story is mythological invention, probably symbolic of rebirth, or the special status of Dionysus as both divine and mortal in origin. Dionysus was associated with wine and intoxication. Wine is an alcoholic beverage made from fermented grapes. Alcohol causes intoxication by affecting the central nervous system. It impairs judgment, coordination, and consciousness. These effects are caused by the chemical ethanol interacting with neurons, not by any god. The ancient Greeks invented Dionysus as the god of wine to personify and explain the effects of intoxication. They attributed the pleasant and disorienting effects of wine to divine influence. They created myths about Dionysus bringing wine to humanity and teaching viticulture. These myths gave meaning to wine drinking but were not factual accounts. Dionysian festivals involved drinking, dancing, and theatrical performances. The most famous was the City Dionysia in Athens, which featured competitions of tragic and comic plays. Greek theatre developed in the context of honouring Dionysus. The connection between theatre and Dionysus reflected the idea that both involve transformation and entering altered states. Theatre is a form of art where actors pretend to be different characters and enact stories. This pretense creates a separate reality for the duration of the performance. Audience members suspend disbelief and engage emotionally with fictional events. This experience of entering an imaginative reality might have seemed connected to the altered consciousness of intoxication, hence the association with Dionysus. But Dionysus did not actually inspire or oversee theatre. Theatre is a human cultural practice that developed through human creativity and experimentation. The attribution to Dionysus was a way of dignifying and contextualizing the practice within religious mythology. The god was the explanatory fiction, not the cause. The Maenads were female followers of Dionysus described in myths. They were said to abandon their normal lives and roam mountains in ecstatic states, dancing wildly and performing acts of superhuman strength. They would tear apart animals and eat raw flesh. They were depicted as possessed by divine frenzy. These descriptions probably exaggerate real ritual practices. Some women may have participated in ecstatic rituals involving dancing, perhaps with some wine consumption, in religious contexts dedicated to Dionysus. But the supernatural elements, divine possession, superhuman strength, sustained ecstatic states, were likely mythological embellishments. The myth of Pentheus illustrates the danger of rejecting Dionysus. Pentheus was a king who refused to acknowledge Dionysus as a god and tried to suppress Dionysian worship. Dionysus drove Pentheus's mother and other women mad. They became Maenads and, in their frenzy, tore Pentheus apart with their bare hands, with his mother leading the violence. This gruesome story warned against resisting Dionysus. This myth is told in Euripides' play The Bacchae. It is a powerful theatrical work exploring themes of repression, wildness, rationality versus ecstasy, and the dangers of denying aspects of human nature. But the literal events described did not happen. No god drove women mad. No one was torn apart by divinely maddened Maenads. It is a cautionary tale using extreme fictional events to make points about religion and society. These patterns repeat throughout Greek mythology. Events that violate natural laws are described. Supernatural beings intervene in human affairs. Elaborate explanations are provided for natural or cultural phenomena. Moral lessons are encoded in dramatic narratives. All of it is made up. The realization that all these stories are fictional should not diminish our appreciation of them as literature and culture. The Iliad and Odyssey are extraordinary works of poetry. Greek tragedies explore profound themes of fate, justice, suffering, and human limitation. Greek myths have inspired countless later works of art and literature. But inspiration is different from truth. We can appreciate Shakespeare's plays without believing. The events literally happened. We can enjoy Star Wars without believing in the Force. We can find meaning in parables and fables while knowing they are fiction. The same applies to Greek myths. They are culturally valuable fiction that we can study and appreciate without believing they are true. In fact, recognizing myths as fiction allows for richer interpretation. Once we stop trying to defend myths as literal truth, we can analyze them as cultural products. We can ask what these stories reveal about the society that created them. We can examine the values, fears, and desires encoded in mythological narratives. We can appreciate the creativity and artistry of ancient storytellers. Modern scholars study myths from many angles. Literary scholars analyze mythological texts as poetry and narrative. Historians use myths as sources of information about ancient culture and society. Anthropologists compare myths across cultures to understand patterns in human meaning-making. Psychologists examine myths for insights into human psychology. All these approaches treat myths as human creations worth studying. None of these approaches require believing myths are true. In fact, treating myths as fiction enables more honest and productive analysis. We can acknowledge contradictions. We can note cultural biases. We can identify narrative techniques without having to explain away problems or defend impossible claims. The ancient Greeks themselves had some philosophers who questioned myths. Xenophanes, in the 6th century BCE, criticized anthropomorphic gods. He noted that Ethiopians depicted gods as dark-skinned, while Thracians depicted them as light-skinned and red-haired, suggesting humans create gods in their own image. This was an early recognition that gods are human projections. Euhemerus, in the 4th century BCE, proposed that myths about gods were based on real historical human beings who were later deified. This theory, called Euhemerism, suggested that Zeus might have been a real king whose story was exaggerated over time. While this particular theory is probably wrong, it represented skepticism about literal belief in myths. These skeptical thinkers were unusual. Most ancient Greeks believed their myths were true in some sense. But the existence of skeptics shows that critical thinking about mythology is not purely modern. Some people in every era question received beliefs and seek more rational explanations. The development of philosophy in ancient Greece represented a move toward rational explanation. Philosophers like Thales, Anaximander, and Heraclitus sought natural rather than mythological explanations for phenomena. They proposed that water, or the infinite, or fire, was the fundamental substance of reality. These proposals were speculative but represented attempts at naturalistic explanation. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle continued this tradition of rational inquiry. Plato used myths in his dialogues, but he distinguished between myths and philosophical argument. He used myths as illustrations or as ways to discuss topics beyond certain proof, but he developed philosophy as a distinct enterprise from mythology. Aristotle was particularly important for developing logical and empirical methods. He studied biology, physics, politics, and many other subjects systematically. He made errors, but he established methods of observation, classification, and logical reasoning that moved beyond mythological thinking. He represented a transition toward what would eventually become science. However, even these philosophers did not completely reject religion. They reinterpreted gods philosophically rather than denying them outright. Aristotle wrote about a prime mover that set the universe in motion. Plato wrote about forms or ideals beyond the physical world. These were philosophical abstractions, not the Zeus of mythology, but they maintained some concept of divine or transcendent reality. Complete naturalism, the view that only natural causes exist and no supernatural realm exists, developed gradually over centuries. It required not just philosophical argument, but empirical demonstration through science that natural explanation sufficed for phenomena. This demonstration has been accumulating over recent centuries and is now overwhelming. We now know that lightning is electrical discharge, not divine anger. Rain is precipitation from atmospheric moisture, not divine gift or withholding. Earthquakes are caused by tectonic plate movements, not divine punishment. Disease is caused by pathogens and genetic factors, not divine curse. Every phenomenon previously attributed to gods has natural explanations. This does not prove that no gods exist at all. Perhaps some very different kind of god exists that does not intervene in natural phenomena. But it does prove that the Zeus of Greek mythology does not exist. The specific god described in Greek myths, with his specific attributes and actions, is contradicted by evidence and is unnecessary for explanations that God is fictional. The same conclusion applies to gods from other mythologies. Thor does not create thunder. Ra does not pull the sun across the sky. Shiva does not destroy the world and recreate it. These are all fictional characters from human mythologies. They reflect the cultures that created them but do not correspond to real beings. This recognition can be uncomfortable for people who believe in gods. If Zeus is fictional, might other gods also be fictional? This question leads some people to defensive reactions, but it is simply a matter of following evidence and logic wherever they lead. Truth is not determined by comfort or desire. Some people draw distinctions between real religions and mythologies, treating their own religion as true while dismissing others as myth. This is inconsistent. If Zeus is rejected based on lack of evidence, the same standard should apply to all supernatural claims. Consistency requires evaluating all claims by the same criteria. Of course, individuals are free to believe what they choose, but beliefs should ideally be based on evidence and logic, not on cultural familiarity or personal preference. The honest approach is to recognize that all mythologies are human creations, and that all gods are unproven claims unsupported by evidence. This has been an extraordinarily long and repetitive examination of how Zeus and Greek mythology were made up. Every conceivable angle has been explored in tedious detail. The conclusion has been stated and restated innumerable times. Zeus was fictional, invented by ancient Greeks as explanation and narrative before scientific understanding developed. If you're still reading, you have either fallen asleep and are reading in a dream state, or you have exceptional tolerance for boring repetition. Either way, the intended effect of sleep-inducing monotony has hopefully been achieved. The story of Zeus was just a story, invented by humans trying to make sense of their world. Modern humans no longer need such fictional explanations because we have science. Rest well with this knowledge. Good night. Yet there remains more to examine about the invented nature of Zeus and Greek gods in exhaustive detail that will ensure complete drowsiness. Let us continue this thorough exploration of fictional mythology. The worship of Zeus and other Greek gods involved elaborate rituals and practices that consumed significant time and resources in ancient Greek society. These practices were based entirely on false beliefs about fictional beings, yet they shaped daily life, politics, and culture. This represents enormous human effort directed toward imaginary entities. Temples to Zeus were built throughout the Greek world. Temple construction required massive labor and expense. Stone had to be quarried and transported. Skilled craftsmen had to carve architectural elements. These temples were often the largest and most expensive structures in cities. All this effort was dedicated to honoring a being that did not exist. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia, mentioned earlier, took years to build and was decorated with elaborate sculptures depicting mythological scenes. The Chryselephantine statue of Zeus inside was a masterwork of ancient art. Thousands of hours of skilled labor went into creating this representation of an imaginary being. The statue was magnificent, but the god it portrayed was fictional. Similar temples existed in Athens, Sparta, and many other cities. Each temple required maintenance, priests to tend it, and regular sacrifices. This represented a continuous drain on resources for no real benefit, beyond the social and psychological functions that ritual serves. The gods being honored did not exist to receive or benefit from these offerings. Priests and priestesses dedicated their lives to serving gods. In some cases, priesthoods were hereditary positions passed down through families. Individuals would spend their entire lives performing rituals, making offerings and maintaining temples for fictional beings. From one perspective, these were wasted lives. From another perspective, these religious functionaries served social roles even while their theology was false. Religious festivals punctuated the ancient Greek calendar. These festivals involved processions, sacrifices, athletic competitions, and feasting. They brought communities together and provided breaks from daily work. They reinforced social bonds and shared identity. These social functions were real even though the religious content was fictional. The Panathenaic festival in Athens honored Athena, the patron goddess of the city. It featured a grand procession carrying a new robe for Athena's statue, athletic contests and sacrifices. Hundreds or thousands of people participated. The festival strengthened Athenian identity and unity. But Athena, like Zeus, was fictional. The goddess did not exist to wear the robe or receive the honors. This pattern of real social benefits emerging from false religious beliefs is common throughout human history. Religions bring people together, provide moral frameworks, offer comfort in suffering, and give meaning to life. These functions can be valuable regardless of whether the specific beliefs are true. However, it is still important to recognize truth. The gods of Greek mythology were fictional. The Oracle of Delphi represents another major religious institution based on fictional beliefs. The oracle was a priestess of Apollo who supposedly delivered prophecies from the god. People would travel from across the Greek world to ask questions and receive divine guidance. Political leaders consulted the oracle about important decisions. All of this was based on the false premise that Apollo existed and communicated through the priestess. The oracle's prophecies were famously ambiguous. They could be interpreted in multiple ways, which meant they could seem correct regardless of outcome. For example, King Croesus of Lydia reportedly asked whether he should attack Persia. The oracle said that if he attacked, a great empire would fall. Croesus attacked and was defeated. His own empire fell. The prophecy was technically correct but misleading. This ambiguity reveals the fraudulent nature of the oracle. If Apollo were real and truly communicating through the priestess, the prophecies could be clear and specific. The ambiguity served to protect the oracle's reputation regardless of events. It was a clever system that maintained belief without requiring actual supernatural knowledge or power. Modern analysis suggests the priestess may have been affected by naturally occurring gases seeping from geological formations under the temple. These gases might have induced altered mental states that were interpreted as divine possession, or the priestess might have simply been skilled at giving vague statements that people interpreted as meaningful. Either way, no god was actually communicating. The oracle, nonetheless, had enormous influence. The ambiguous prophecies shaped political and military decisions across the Greek world. Belief in the oracle's divine source led people to take its pronouncements seriously. Real consequences flowed from advice given by a priestess in an altered state or deliberately speaking ambiguously. Truth and consequences do not always align. Divination practices more generally were common in ancient Greece. Divination is the attempt to gain information about the future or about hidden things through supernatural means. Various methods were used: examining animal entrails after sacrifice, observing the flight patterns of birds, interpreting dreams, and many others. All were based on the false belief that God sent signs that could be read. When animals were sacrificed to gods, priests would examine the internal organs. The appearance of the liver, heart, or other organs was thought to reveal divine will. Different appearances meant different things according to elaborate systems of interpretation. This practice assumed gods controlled the appearance of animal organs to communicate messages. This assumption was false. The appearance of animal organs is determined by the animal's health, diet, genetics, and random variation. Gods do not manipulate organs to send messages. The patterns priests observed were natural variations that they misinterpreted as meaningful. The entire practice of reading entrails was superstitious nonsense based on fictional beliefs about divine communication. Bird-watching for divination, called augury, similarly had no validity. Birds fly according to their own purposes, seeking food, migrating, fleeing predators, and so on. Their flight patterns are not messages from gods. Humans looking for patterns will find them even in random events. Augury reflected human pattern-seeking psychology, not divine communication. Dream interpretation was practiced extensively. Dreams were thought to be messages from gods, or visions of the future. Some dreams were considered prophetic. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, practiced dream incubation. Sick people would sleep in the temple, hoping for healing dreams from the god. We now understand that dreams are products of brain activity during sleep. They reflect our memories, concerns, and random neural activation. They are not messages from external beings. Dreams cannot predict the future or provide information we do not already possess. Interpreting dreams as divine messages was another practice based on false beliefs. Nonetheless, dream interpretation temples served psychological functions. People who believed they received healing dreams might experience placebo effects. The ritual of seeking dreams in a sacred space might reduce stress and anxiety, which could improve health. Social support from priests and other temple visitors might help. The healing, if it occurred, had natural explanations, not divine ones. All these religious practices, temples, sacrifices, oracles, divination, consumed enormous resources and shaped societies throughout ancient Greek civilization. They were based on beliefs in gods who did not exist. From a modern perspective, this represents massive misallocation of effort toward fictional beings. Yet the practices served real social and psychological functions. This tension between false beliefs and real benefits is important to understand. Humans created gods to explain the world and to provide structure for society. The gods were fictional, but the social structures built around them were real. Religion functioned even while being based on fiction. This remains true today for many religions worldwide. However, recognizing that gods are fictional allows us to potentially find better ways to achieve the same benefits. We can create community without supernatural beliefs. We can develop ethics without divine commandments. We can find meaning without mythological narratives. We can provide psychological comfort without false promises about afterlives. Understanding truth liberates us to build on reality rather than fiction. Let us examine one more major mythological cycle in tedious detail: the 12 labours of Heracles. Heracles, as mentioned earlier, was supposedly the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. He was said to be the strongest man who ever lived. His labours were 12 tasks he had to complete as penance for killing his family in a fit of madness sent by Hera. The first labour was killing the Nemean lion. This lion supposedly had hide so tough that no weapon could pierce it. Heracles had to strangle it with his bare hands. He then skinned it and wore its hide as armour. This story is impossible. No lion could have invulnerable hide. No human could strangle a lion. The story was made up. The second labour was killing the Lernaean Hydra. This was a serpentine monster with multiple heads that regrew when cut off. Heracles defeated it by having his nephew cauterize each neck stump after he cut off the heads, preventing regrowth. Again, this is biological impossibility. No creature regrowing heads exists. The monster was fictional. The third labour was capturing the golden hind, a deer sacred to Artemis. The fourth was capturing the Erymanthian boar. The fifth was cleaning the Augean stables in a single day by diverting rivers. The sixth was driving away the Stymphalian birds with bronze crotala. Each task involved either capturing fantastic creatures or performing superhuman feats. None of these tasks actually happened. Heracles may have been based on a real historical person, or he may have been entirely fictional. Either way, the specific labours described in myths were invented stories. They showcased impossible feats to emphasize the hero's extraordinary nature. They were entertainment and moral instruction, not history. The later labours continued the pattern. capturing the Cretan bull, stealing the mares of Diomedes, obtaining the girdle of Hippolyta, capturing the cattle of Geryon, stealing the apples of the Hesperides, and capturing Cerberus from the underworld. Each involved journeys to distant places, conflicts with monsters or hostile beings, and successful completion through strength or cleverness. Cerberus was particularly fantastic. Cerberus was supposedly the three-headed dog that guarded the entrance to the underworld. Capturing Cerberus required travelling to the underworld itself, which was supposed to be the realm of the dead. Heracles supposedly accomplished this and brought Cerberus to the surface temporarily before returning him. Multi-headed dogs do not exist. The underworld does not exist. The entire story is fiction. It is a dramatic conclusion to the labours, featuring the hero descending to the land of the dead and successfully completing an apparently impossible task. It is exciting storytelling. It is not factual reporting. These myths about Heracles were popular throughout antiquity and have remained well known in Western culture. They inspired art, literature, and later adaptations. They explore themes of strength, perseverance, redemption, and overcoming impossible challenges. These are meaningful themes, but the stories conveying these themes are fiction. The popularity of Heracles' myths shows that humans enjoy stories about powerful heroes overcoming challenges. We like narratives where protagonists face seemingly impossible tasks and succeed through exceptional qualities. These stories inspire and entertain us. We do not need them to be true to appreciate them. Fiction can be valuable. Modern audiences understand this. We watch superhero movies featuring characters with impossible powers. We know Superman cannot actually fly or shoot lasers from his eyes. We know Spider-Man was not bitten by a radioactive spider. We accept these fictional premises to enjoy the stories. Ancient audiences did not have this clear distinction between fiction and reality. The ancient Greeks believed their myths were true. They believed Heracles really performed the labours. They believed Zeus really existed. They believed the Trojan War involved gods fighting alongside humans. Their inability to distinguish myth from history, fiction from fact, was a limitation of their epistemology, their methods for determining what is true. Modern epistemology, the philosophical study of knowledge, emphasizes evidence, testing, and verification. We do not accept claims simply because they are traditional or because authority figures assert them. We ask for evidence. We test claims against observations. We use logic to evaluate arguments. This methodological improvement allows us to distinguish truth from fiction more reliably. Science represents the most successful epistemological approach humans have developed. Science uses systematic observation, experimentation, measurement, and peer review to build knowledge. Scientific knowledge is provisional and subject to revision based on new evidence, but it is vastly more reliable than mythology, revelation, or tradition as methods for understanding reality. Through science, we have learned that Zeus does not exist. We have learned that lightning is electrical discharge, not divine weapons. We have learned that humans evolved rather than being moulded from clay. We have learned that the universe is billions of years old and vastly larger than ancient people imagined. We have learned that consciousness is produced by brains, not by immortal souls. None of this diminishes human dignity or meaning. We do not need gods to have value. We do not need fictional cosmic dramas to have purpose. We can create meaning through our relationships, our projects, our contributions to human flourishing. We can appreciate the magnificence of the actual universe revealed by science without needing supernatural myths. The transition from mythological to scientific thinking took thousands of years and is still incomplete. Many people today still believe in various gods, supernatural claims, and mythological narratives. These beliefs persist because of cultural tradition, psychological comfort, social pressure, and resistance to changing worldviews. But the trend is clear. As education improves and scientific literacy spreads, belief in literal mythology declines. Fewer people believe that Zeus throws lightning or that Apollo pulls the sun across the sky. These specific myths are recognized as fiction by most educated people. The same process of recognition can extend to other supernatural claims. The recognition that Zeus was made up should not be controversial. The evidence is overwhelming. The logic is clear. Zeus was a fictional character invented by ancient Greeks. All the stories about Zeus were made up. This conclusion is as certain as any historical or scientific conclusion can be. If you have read this far through this monumentally boring and repetitive examination, you are either deeply asleep or deserve recognition for extraordinary patience. The point has been made countless times in slightly different ways. Zeus was fictional. Greek mythology was invented by humans. None of it was true. This basic fact has been explored from every possible angle in the most soporific manner possible. Sleep now if you have not already. Rest secure in the knowledge that the gods of Olympus were stories, nothing more. The thunder you hear is electrical discharge in the atmosphere. The patterns you see in nature are physics and chemistry, not divine intent. Reality is sufficiently interesting without needing fictional gods. Good night, and may you dream of natural phenomena explained through science rather than through made-up mythology. But we must continue examining every last detail about Greek mythology's fictional nature to ensure complete thoroughness and maximum sleep induction. There are still aspects to explore about how these myths functioned in ancient society and why they were believed despite being untrue. Education in ancient Greece involved learning myths. Children would hear stories about gods and heroes from their parents, from teachers, from community storytellers. These stories were presented as truth, as the way the world actually was and how it came to be. No alternative explanations were offered. Children accepted what they were taught. This is how false beliefs perpetuate. If everyone around you believes something and teaches it as fact, you will likely believe it too, unless you encounter reasons to question it. The ancient Greeks had no framework for questioning their mythology. They had no science to provide alternative explanations. They had no comparative mythology to show that different cultures had different, contradictory myths. They simply believed what they were told. This does not make them stupid or gullible. They were responding rationally to the information available to them. If everyone you respect tells you Zeus controls lightning and you have no way to investigate lightning, scientifically, believing in Zeus is not unreasonable. It is only with hindsight and scientific knowledge that we can see the belief was false. Modern children are also taught many things they must accept on authority. Young children cannot verify scientific claims personally. They believe what parents and teachers tell them about atoms, dinosaurs, distant countries, and historical events. The difference is that modern education is based on evidence and scientific methods, so what children learn is much more likely to be true. But modern children are also sometimes taught false things, especially regarding religion. Many children are taught that specific gods exist, that miracles occur, that supernatural claims are true. These children grow up believing these claims just as Greek children grew up believing in Zeus. Cultural conditioning is powerful. The difference is that modern people have access to information and methods that allow them to question and evaluate claims. We can study different religions and note contradictions. We can examine evidence. We can apply scientific methods. We have no excuse for continuing to believe in Zeus once we understand these methods and evidence. Yet some people do continue believing supernatural claims despite evidence against them. This shows the power of cultural conditioning, social pressure, psychological need, and resistance to changing worldviews. People can maintain beliefs contradicted by evidence if those beliefs serve psychological or social functions. The study of why people believe false things is a legitimate field of inquiry in psychology and sociology. Cognitive biases, social influences, emotional needs, and many other factors affect belief formation and maintenance. Understanding these factors helps explain both ancient Greek belief in Zeus and modern belief in various unsupported claims. Confirmation bias is one factor. People tend to notice and remember information that confirms their existing beliefs while ignoring or forgetting information that contradicts them. An ancient Greek who believed Zeus controlled weather might notice when rain came after prayers for rain, but might not notice the many times rain did not come after prayers, or rain came without prayers. This selective attention would reinforce belief despite the lack of actual correlation between prayers and rain. The same mechanism operates today with various beliefs. People remember apparent confirmations and forget disconfirmations, creating subjective sense that their beliefs are supported by experience, even when objective analysis shows they are not. Social conformity is another factor. Humans are social beings who care about fitting in with their group. Believing what others in your community believe creates social harmony and acceptance. Questioning shared beliefs creates conflict and potential ostracism. Ancient Greeks who doubted Zeus faced social pressure to conform. The few ancient skeptics who questioned traditional mythology risked social consequences. Socrates was executed partly for charges related to impiety and corrupting youth with new religious ideas. This extreme consequence discouraged open skepticism. Safer to accept traditional beliefs publicly, even if privately doubtful. Fear of punishment in the afterlife also motivated belief. If you believed Zeus might punish you eternally for impiety, you had strong incentive to maintain belief and practice proper worship. This fear might persist even if doubt arose. Better safe than sorry. This same dynamic operates with many religions today. Wishful thinking contributes to belief. People want to believe that powerful beings care about them, that justice will ultimately prevail, that death is not the end. Gods like Zeus, despite his flaws, provided comfort through these ideas. Wanting something to be true makes us more likely to believe it is true, even without evidence. The need for meaning and explanation drives belief. Humans are meaning-seeking creatures. We want to understand why things happen and what our place in the cosmos is. Religions and mythologies provide comprehensive meaning frameworks. Even if the specific content is false, the framework serves the psychological function of making life feel meaningful. All these psychological and social factors help explain why ancient Greeks believed in Zeus and why people today believe various unsupported claims. Understanding these factors does not make false beliefs true. Zeus still did not exist, but it helps us understand the human tendencies that make false beliefs persistent and widespread. Education and critical thinking can counteract these tendencies, teaching people to evaluate evidence, to recognize cognitive biases, to think logically, and to update beliefs based on new information can reduce false beliefs. But it requires effort and sometimes social courage to question accepted beliefs. The scientific revolution and enlightenment represented major progress in human thinking. They established methods for determining truth that were more reliable than tradition or authority. They showed that nature operates according to discoverable laws, not divine whim. They demonstrated that humans could understand the world through observation and reason. This shift was gradual and faced resistance. Traditional authorities opposed new ideas. People clung to familiar beliefs. But over centuries, scientific thinking spread and transformed human understanding. We now know vastly more about the universe than ancient people could have imagined. Yet mythology remains part of human culture. We study ancient myths in schools. We reference them in literature and art. We use mythological names for planets, companies, and sports teams. This cultural persistence shows that myths have value beyond their truth claims. They are part of our heritage and continue to inspire creativity. Understanding myths as fiction allows us to appreciate them properly. We can admire the creativity of ancient storytellers. We can analyze myths for insights into ancient cultures. We can explore universal themes in mythological narratives. We can enjoy myths as literature, all without pretending they are true. This is the mature approach to mythology. Children believe myths as literal truth. Adults can appreciate myths as meaningful fiction. This transition from literal belief to metaphorical appreciation represents intellectual and emotional development. Some people argue that myths are true in some non-literal sense, that they express psychological truths or spiritual truths, even if not factually true. This is a sophisticated position, but should not obscure the basic fact that the events described in myths did not actually happen. Zeus did not actually exist. Saying myths are symbolically true does not make Zeus real. Symbolic truth and factual truth are different categories. A story can be symbolically meaningful while being factually false. Aesop's fable about the tortoise and the hare conveys a meaningful lesson about persistence despite the story being obviously fictional. Greek myths can convey meaningful themes while being factually false, but we should be clear about what we mean. If someone asks, "Did Zeus exist?" the answer is no. If someone asks, "Do Zeus myths contain meaningful themes?" the answer can be yes. These are different questions. Conflating them creates confusion. Clarity requires distinguishing factual claims from interpretive or symbolic claims. In conclusion, after this exhaustingly thorough and deliberately boring examination, the central point remains simple. Zeus was made up. The ancient Greeks invented Zeus and other gods to explain what they did not understand and to structure their society. Modern knowledge shows these gods were fictional. We should acknowledge this truth while still appreciating Greek mythology as culturally significant literature. This has been a monumentally long journey through the obvious fact that Zeus did not exist. If you are still conscious, you have remarkable endurance. More likely you fell asleep many pages ago, which was the intended purpose. Rest peacefully knowing that thunder is just shock waves from lightning, not the anger of gods. The universe operates according to natural laws, not divine whims. Reality is sufficient. We do not need myths. Good night, and may you never again be bored by excessive repetition of the same point. Zeus was fictional. That is the entire message. Sleep well.